story. And there is a third story hiding underneath both of them that almost no one in international commentary is talking about. November 2026, there is a midterm election. When you understand why those three things connect, the 40 trillion in debt, the economic D-Day declaration, and the November election, you will see something that changes everything. Trump is not attacking Iran. He is running away from something else entirely. Stay with me. Before I walk you through my analytical framework, I need to dismantle a story that most people are currently accepting without question. The story goes like this. Trump is applying maximum economic pressure on Iran in order to force Tehran back to the negotiating table. It sounds logical. It sounds like a coherent foreign policy move, and to be clear, most mainstream coverage presents it exactly that way, without much interrogation. But I want to show you 4 signals embedded in Trump's own behavior that suggests even he does not believe the story. The first signal, there are no details. He announced the most crushing economic operation in human history and provided 0 specifics. No executive order was signed at the time of the announcement. No list of targeted countries was released. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had to schedule a separate press conference for the following Monday just to provide the actual substance, meaning even his own inner circle had not yet worked out what this operation would look like. When a military commander announces a D-Day invasion, the ships are already in the water. When a president announces economic D-Day and then schedules a press conference to explain it later, you are watching the announcement, not the strategy. The second signal, no military threat. In previous weeks, Trump oscillated between threatening what he called Armageddon-level military escalation and simultaneously hinting that negotiations were still possible. This time, not a single reference to military power, not one word about the U.S. military's capabilities or readiness to escalate. Now, think about what that absence tells you. When a party with genuine leverage issues a warning, they don't need to amplify it with performance. The leverage speaks for itself. When the performance becomes the entire message, that is a signal of desperation, not strength. The third signal, and this is the one most commentators missed, is about the audience. The target audience of this message may be the American public, not Iran. The American public, not Tehran. That single observation rewires the entire interpretation of what we just witnessed. And the fourth signal, perhaps the most structurally revealing of all, Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, had just told reporters that back-channel contacts with Tehran were proceeding, and I quote, very robustly and very powerfully. The very next day, Trump went on Truth Social and completely denied it. He wrote, there are no negotiations taking place or scheduled. Now, I want you to hold that contradiction in your mind for a moment, because this is not a miscommunication. This is not a family disagreement that leaked. What you are looking at is a technique that intelligence analysts call weaponized ambiguity. When you simultaneously threaten and negotiate, when you simultaneously deny and engage, you are deliberately flooding the information environment with noise. No one, including your own allies, can determine what your actual objective is. And here's the key. That technique is not designed to pressure a foreign adversary. Foreign adversaries don't care about your Truth Social posts. That technique is designed to manage a domestic audience. Which brings us to the framework I've spent the last 15 years developing, what I call the 3-layer convergence. Every major decision made by an imperial power can be decoded through 3 simultaneous layers of analysis. When all 3 layers point in the same direction, you can predict with high confidence what comes next. Layer 1 is geopolitics, who currently holds the positional advantage on the strategic chessboard. Layer 2 is imperial decline. At what stage of the deterioration cycle is the dominant power operating? Layer 3 is game theory. Which player is currently trapped by their own prior commitments? Let us go through each one. I want to begin with a quote from Alan Ayer, a former member of the United States nuclear negotiating team with Iran, a man who sat across the table from Iranian officials during the most sensitive diplomatic engagements of the past 2 decades. He is not an outsider commentator. He was in the room. He said, the sanctions tree has already been picked clean. Since 1979, the United States has issued 26 presidential executive orders targeting Iran, 10 acts of Congress, hundreds of targeted sanctions programs. Every transaction that touches the U.S. dollar, Every entity that interacts with the American financial system has already been prohibited, many times over. Legal experts confirm no additional unilateral measure can amount to a total embargo without authorization from the United Nations Security Council. That authorization does not exist. So what new weapon does Trump actually have? In practical terms, secondary sanctions, threatening to punish other countries for continuing to trade with Iran. And the primary target is China, which buys more than 80% of Iran's shipped crude oil. But here is what Iran has quietly constructed over the past 5 years. And this is the part that makes the entire pressure campaign structurally hollow. In 2020, Iran operated approximately 70 shadow tankers, vessels that disable their tracking systems, switch flags, and mask their origin. By 2025, that fleet had grown to 550 ships, and the oil those ships carry does not flow through American banks. It flows to independent teapot refineries in China's Shandong province, small, private refineries with zero exposure to the U.S. financial system. You cannot sanction a transaction that doesn't touch your currency or your institutions. Let me put it simply, you cannot punish someone who is not playing in your game. Now, Ali Akbar Darini, a strategic analyst at the Center for Strategic Studies in Tehran, has given the entire U.S. campaign a name that I think is extraordinarily precise. He calls it the Anaconda strategy. His words, like the anaconda snake that coils around its prey, tightening step by step until the prey suffocates. The United States is pursuing this strategy to bring Iran to economic and political exhaustion before delivering a final blow. This is the strategy because everything tried over the past 5 months has failed. And then he adds a sentence I want you to hold on to. Trump is stuck in a war he cannot win and cannot escape. An Iranian analyst, not a Chinese diplomat, not a European critic, reading the trap more clearly than the people inside it. But there is another geopolitical dimension that almost no analyst has addressed. While Trump was making his economic D-Day announcement in Washington, Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bakir Ghalibaf was in Baghdad, not in Tehran, not making defensive statements from Iran. He was in Baghdad meeting with Iraq's National Security Advisor and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he delivered a message with precision: the Strait of Hormuz will remain fully closed until the United States fulfills the terms of the June Memorandum of Understanding, including unfreezing Iranian assets, lifting oil sanctions, and ending the naval blockade. The photo released by Iranian state media showed Ghalibaf positioned with the map of the Persian Gulf visible in the background, his silhouette overlapping the Hormuz choke point. That image was not accidental. Think about this through the lens of game theory. Trump uses economic pressure. Iran uses Hormuz as counter leverage. But here is the asymmetry that matters. Hormuz does not only damage Iran, its closure disrupts the entire global energy supply chain. Qatar's prime minister has demanded it be reopened. Egypt's foreign minister has insisted on free navigation. Turkey's president calls it a priority. The economic pressure campaign that was supposed to isolate Iran is instead isolating the United States from its regional partners. Geopolitical layer 1 verdict. The technical toolkit for effective economic pressure simply does not exist in the form Trump is claiming. So why is he doing it? That takes us to layer 2. The $40 trillion debt milestone did not arrive on a neutral day. It arrived driven in part, according to Treasury Department data, by billions in lost tariff revenue from Trump's own trade policies that were invalidated by the courts. The government had to borrow more rapidly to cover basic expenses. Peter Turchin, the scholar who has spent 30 years modeling the collapse patterns of historical empires, offers a theory he calls elite overproduction. The premise is simple but devastating. As an empire declines, it generates more elite competitors than the system can accommodate. The result is internal instability, increasingly extreme political behavior, and leaders who must perform escalation to maintain their position, even when escalation is counterproductive. Trump is not the cause of American imperial decline. He is the symptom of it. And the shift from military pressure to economic warfare is not, as the administration presents it, a strategic upgrade. It is a downgrade driven by resource exhaustion. The Pentagon, and this was covered in my previous episode, so I will only reference it briefly here, has warned that after 6 months of intensive air operations, precision munitions stockpiles have been significantly depleted. The Patriot interceptor batteries, the Tomahawk cruise missiles, the operational tempo of the opening months of the conflict cannot be sustained. Economic D-Day is not a stronger play. It is what you play when the stronger plays are no longer available. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Garib Abedi said it with surgical clarity. The military war did not work, so they have named the next failure economic war. Now here's what gives this analysis an additional edge, not the words of an enemy, the words of an insider. Jennifer Gavito served as U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. She sat inside the American foreign policy apparatus. She coordinated Iran policy at the State Department. And she assessed the entire economic D-Day campaign with a sentence that deserves to be engraved somewhere permanent. She said, the U.S. still has tools. That being said, these are tools, not a strategy. Tools, not a strategy. Not an Iranian scholar, not a Beijing spokesperson, a former senior U.S. government official, someone who knows exactly how the machinery works from the inside, confirming what the three-layer framework reveals from the outside. And there is a third layer of domestic pressure that virtually no international commentary is engaging with seriously. November 2026, the midterm elections, the Republican Party faces a genuine risk of losing control of Congress, and the pressure is not only coming from opinion polls, it is coming from within the national security establishment itself. Senator Mark Warner, Vice Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, one of the most senior voices on American national security, publicly asked, and I quote, "When will Trump walk away from this disastrous and deadly war?" When the Vice Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee is asking that question openly, you are no longer looking at partisan criticism. You are looking at institutional exhaustion. American voters are paying higher fuel prices, higher food prices, $40 trillion in national debt, and the war in the Gulf shows no sign of resolution. Trump needs what political scientists call the rally round the flag effect, a moment of perceived national assertion that consolidates support before the November vote. Economic D-Day is that moment. It was engineered for a domestic audience, not for Tehran. But I want to share one more historical detail, the kind of detail that only reveals itself to those who read history with patience. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi pointed out that Trump's economic D-Day announcement was issued on the anniversary of a date that every Iranian knows by heart, August 19th, 1953. That was the day the CIA and British MI6 orchestrated a coup that overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran's democratically elected prime minister. Mossadegh's crime? He had nationalized Iran's oil industry. He had decided that Iranian oil belonged to Iranians, not to Western energy companies. 73 years later, the United States is once again using Iranian oil as the central lever of strategic coercion. History does not only rhyme, sometimes it repeats itself to an exact date. Now, if this pattern, a declining empire, depleted resources, an approaching election, coercing reluctant allies to join a campaign they don't believe in, sounds familiar to you, it should, because we have seen it before in 1941, and I want to be precise about how these two frameworks connect, because a careful listener will notice I've used two different strategic metaphors. Delaney's Anaconda describes what Trump thinks he's doing, patient, methodical constriction before a final blow. Barbarossa describes the pattern of how campaigns like this actually end. Ambitious overreach, fractured coalitions, and a new offensive launched precisely to disguise exhaustion on the original front. The Anaconda is the plan. Barbarossa is the failure mode. They are not contradictions. They are the same story told from two different vantage points, one from inside the strategy room, one from inside the history books. Operation Barbarossa. Nazi Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union in June of that year. They pressured Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, Finland, and Italy to join the campaign through ultimatums. And they failed in a specific pattern that has 4 points of convergence with what the United States is doing today. Point of convergence 1, strategic hubris. In 1941, General von Brauchitsch calculated that the Soviet Union would collapse within 6 weeks. Hitler famously said, "We only have to kick in the rotten door and the whole structure will fall." They catastrophically underestimated the enemy's depth, resilience, and capacity to absorb punishment. In 2026, Trump declared he would force Iran into unconditional surrender. He described Iranian leaders as maniacs on the ropes. He is underestimating nearly 5 decades of Iranian adaptation to economic siege, a shadow fleet of 550 vessels, and a sanctions evasion infrastructure of extraordinary sophistication, built precisely because Iran has been preparing for this moment while the world wasn't watching. Point of convergence 2, unilateral coercion. In 1941, Germany did not consult its Axis partners before finalizing its operational plans. Romania, Italy, and Hungary were informed late and presented with a fait accompli. They were used as auxiliary instruments, not genuine partners. In 2026, Scott Bessent delivered an ultimatum to the world. You are either with us or against us. No multilateral framework. No attempt to build consensus through the UN Security Council's permanent members. Just a unilateral demand, and the world's response, like 1941, has been cold and skeptical. Point of convergence 3, ally divergence. In 1941, each Axis partner had incompatible objectives. Finland wanted its territory back. Romania wanted Bessarabia. Italy wanted Mediterranean influence. The coalition fractured under the weight of contradictory goals. In 2026, the United States Naval Patrol Initiative, Project Freedom, in the Strait of Hormuz collapsed within days of launch when Saudi Arabia refused to provide military basing rights. The UAE has announced an embargo on Iran, but other Gulf states are maintaining cautious neutrality. China has flatly rejected the entire pressure framework. Qatar is calling for diplomacy. Each supposed partner has its own calculation. No one is truly standing behind Washington the way Bessent's rhetoric implies. Point of convergence 4, covering military exhaustion. In 1941, the decision to open the Eastern Front came precisely when Germany could not subdue Britain and the war economy was beginning to buckle. Barbarossa was designed to create new momentum, to paper over the stalemate in the West with a dramatic new offensive. In 2026, economic D-Day arrives after 6 months of military stalemate, significant depletion of precision munitions, and a national debt crossing $40 trillion. It is designed to generate media momentum, to paper over military exhaustion with a dramatic new declaration. History does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes with remarkable precision. Now to the final layer, the one that explains why Iran is not afraid. In game theory, there's a condition called the credibility trap. As I explained in previous episodes, it works like this. When a player has issued too many threats without following through, their credibility collapses. And once credibility collapses, subsequent threats become functionally meaningless, even if the player is now genuinely serious. Independent political analyst Alex Shears identifies what he calls the original sin of the entire American campaign against Iran. The United States has continuously shifted its stated objective from unconditional surrender to regime collapse, from territorial fragmentation to internal destabilization, and now to total economic warfare. No one, not allies, not adversaries, not markets, can calibrate their response to a player whose red lines move every few weeks. But here is the specific, concrete mechanism that explains why Iran can hold its position for the next critical period, September 24th, 2026. That is the date Chinese President Xi Jinping is scheduled to visit the White House. Now think about this purely through game theory logic. Trump is threatening to sanction Chinese banks for purchasing Iranian oil. At the same time, he is preparing to host the Chinese president at his own residence in 35 days. The two countries are in the middle of a fragile trade truce. The United States depends on China for rare earth mineral exports that are critical to both its technology and defense industries. Columbia University's Erica Downs has pointed out explicitly that China retains the ability to restrict those rare earth exports as a countermeasure. If Trump actually sanctions major Chinese financial institutions before September 24th, he destroys the summit, triggers a full economic Cold War with Beijing, and potentially loses access to materials his own defense industry cannot replace. Beijing knows this. Tehran knows this. And Russia? Russia is already under maximum sanctions. NBC News, citing a European government document, has reported that Russia is currently shipping drone components, ammunition, and TNT to Iran through the Caspian Sea. What additional sanction could the United States possibly impose on Moscow that hasn't already been imposed? The answer is very little. Iran has a 35-day window in which the United States cannot make its most severe threats operational. And Iran, with nearly 5 decades of experience surviving economic siege, knows how to wait. The 3-layer verdict is now complete. Geopolitics says the technical tools don't work. Imperial decline says the campaign is driven by domestic political survival, not strategic design. Game theory says the enforcement mechanism is blocked for the next 35 days. Economic D-Day is not a strategy, it is a performance. But I have to be honest with you, if I were assigned to defend Trump's position, to make the strongest possible argument for why the pressure campaign is working, here is what I would say. The pressure is real, the damage is real, and here is the evidence. Abdulnazir Hemati, governor of the Central Bank of Iran, admitted on national Iranian television that Iran's oil exports through official channels have effectively fallen to zero, not significantly reduced, not at a multi-year low, zero to any traceable legitimate pathway. He also confirmed all of Iran's foreign exchange reserves held outside the country remain frozen under U.S. and allied sanctions. Severe foreign currency shortages are affecting basic import capacity. Youth unemployment is rising. Post-war reconstruction costs are enormous. And the fuel crisis in Tehran is not a rumor. Iran's Deputy Director of Energy, Yasser Mirzai, publicly warned that the domestic fuel situation had become, in his words, an extremely critical problem. Gas stations in the capital have been running dry. Citizens are panic buying fuel. In an oil-producing nation, fuel shortages in the capital city are not a trivial signal. Now, you may be wondering, if official exports have collapsed to zero, why does trade data still show China importing Iranian oil? The answer is the shadow fleet. What little still moves, approximately 534,000 barrels per day, according to Clever Analytics, down from 1.4 million in 2025, travels through tankers with their transponders switched off, under false flags, processed through independent Chinese refineries that have zero exposure to the American financial system. The naval blockade has crushed Iran's legitimate oil income. The shadow network absorbs the remainder. Both facts are true simultaneously, and together they tell you the squeeze is real, but not total. The UAE, which has historically served as Iran's most critical trade conduit and access point to global financial markets, has now declared an indefinite trade embargo. Iran is being constricted, really constricted. The Anaconda is tightening. So where does my analysis go wrong? Here's my answer. I did not say the pressure has no effect. I said the effect it produces is not the one the pressure is designed to produce. Alan Eyre, the same former U.S. negotiator I quoted earlier, explains the psychological logic of Iranian leadership with a precision that the Trump administration has simply refused to absorb. He says when Iranian leaders face an existential threat, they do not compromise. They view concession under attack as a sign of weakness that will invite further pressure. What is far more likely to occur is not Iranian capitulation, but counter-escalation, including military action to break the naval blockade, potentially targeting Gulf state energy infrastructure. This is what scholars of Iranian political culture call the Shia martyrdom logic. It is not a rationality. It is a different rationality, one in which yielding under maximum pressure is structurally impossible because it signals that pressure works, which invites more pressure. The end game of that logic is not negotiation, it is escalation. Former Iranian diplomat Abbas Kamayer has been explicit. Iranian patience is running out. Something is being cooked in the kitchens of the decision makers. A surprise. And Iran is not merely enduring, it is constructing alternatives. Central Bank Governor Hemati's August 16th, 20-working visit to Baghdad also produced a concrete financial outcome, a framework agreement to clear banking barriers between Iran and Iraq, opening a pathway to unfreeze Iranian assets held in Iraqi financial institutions. Iran has just announced its intent to join the BRICS New Development Bank, which would open financing corridors entirely outside the Western-dominated SWIFT system. Iran has signed a bilateral oil export agreement with Tajikistan, a small deal, but one that signals the active construction of a Eurasian trade network built around non-dollar rails. Here is a strategic irony that the Trump administration has not grasped. Economic pressure is not breaking Iran. It is accelerating the construction of a parallel financial architecture that over time will erode the very foundation of US dollar dominance. The Anaconda is squeezing, but the organism it is squeezing is simultaneously evolving to survive without oxygen. I do not make predictions I cannot be held accountable for. Save this video, come back in 6 months. Let's see what happened. Prediction 1. Secondary sanctions targeting Chinese financial institutions will not be meaningfully enforced before September 24, 2026. There will be more threatening language. There may be a few small Chinese entities added to sanctions lists, but there will be no action against major Chinese banks, because that action would destroy the Xi Jinping summit, which both sides need to maintain the appearance of manageable relations. The 35-day window holds. Prediction 2. Iran will announce a military or technological surprise within the next 6 weeks. The signals are too consistent to ignore. A former Iranian diplomat speaks of something being cooked. The IRGC has publicly announced development of next-generation weapons with, in their words, completely different characteristics from anything previously deployed, greater precision, extended range. Iran does not issue warnings like this without subsequent action. History shows that when Iran is backed into a corner, it does not respond with words. It responds with a specific, calculated escalation, designed to demonstrate that the cost of continued pressure is unacceptable. Prediction 3. The BRICS parallel financial system will achieve a concrete operational milestone before the end of 2026. The pieces are assembling with increasing speed. BRICS new development bank membership for Iran, bilateral currency swap agreements, the Tajikistan oil deal, the Iraq banking corridor, none of these are individually transformative. Together, as a system, they represent the scaffolding of a non-dollar financial infrastructure that, once operational at scale, will be extraordinarily difficult to dismantle. Prediction 4. The dominant narrative of this conflict will shift to American domestic politics before November. When $40 trillion in debt, sustained price increases, and continued military deployment converge with a midterm election, the domestic pressure on the United States will exceed any pressure it can generate externally against Iran. Trump has already begun directing his messaging toward American voters rather than toward Tehran. That is a signature of a player preparing an exit. The question is no longer who wins. The question is who controls the story of the withdrawal. Let me bring you back to where we started. August 20th, 2026. American public debt crosses $40 trillion. Trump declares economic D-Day, the same day, 73 years earlier. In the same month of August, the United States engineered the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh for nationalizing Iranian oil. 73 years later, the United States is using Iranian oil as its primary instrument of strategic coercion against the successors of the government that replaced him. History does not only rhyme. Sometimes the rhyme scheme is so precise it becomes eerie. In 1941, Hitler opened the Eastern Front when he could not subdue Britain and his war economy was beginning to buckle. He called it the path to final victory. It was the beginning of the collapse. I am not saying the United States is about to collapse. I want to be very clear about that. American institutional depth, reserve currency status, and military reach remain formidable, even in a period of relative decline. What I am saying is this. The pattern of behavior we are observing, strategic hubris in assessing the adversary, unilateral coercion of reluctant partners, fracturing of the coalition, and the use of spectacular new offensives to cover for exhaustion on the primary front is the behavioral signature of a power acting from weakness, not from strength. Jennifer Gavito, a former senior U.S. official, told us, these are tools, not a strategy. Alan